Hi, everybody. It's an honor to be here. I'm glad to be here. Thank you to Nahid for organizing this panel, and it's a real honor to present in front of so many people who have been inspirational to me. So the title of my talk today is Iranian Popular Music and the Politics of Impiety. I'll focus on diaspora. And I'll say that, giving a talk at the end of a conference that's been mostly on a set of contained subjects is helpful in some ways, but may lead to some redundancies. What I hope is that it will actually be a nice way to connect many of the things that we've been talking about over the last couple of days. So this talk is about Tehrangeles. Tehrangeles, as most of you know, refers to the expatriate Iranian popular culture industries that grew up in Southern California beginning in the late 1970s, the product of a mass exodus of popular musicians, journalists, media personalities, and other creative types from Iran around the time of the revolution. For the nearly 2 decades when popular music was not permitted in Iran, Tehrangeles was the world's sole mass producer of Persian-language popular music. Many famous pre-revolutionary vocalists, songwriters, and lyricists who first came to national consciousness in the 1960s and 70s then became exiles in Southern California, where they acquired a new identity as Los Angelesi. So Los Angelesi is an epithet. It's a negative term, and people who live there do not necessarily appreciate being called this term, in part because the assertion is that they are not Irani anymore. They are Los Angelesi, as if they have split off and become another branch. So this assertion of separation that's especially given to them by people who don't live there, who are not part of this community, is in some ways unfair because the Iranian diasporic music industry in Los Angeles is one of the most highly, if not the most highly developed expatriate music industries in the world that can boast a relationship with its home country. Maybe we could think of Taiwan, exiles who left mainland China and went to Taiwan, or maybe we could think of Vietnamese who went to Orange County and also, in both cases, sent music back to their home countries. But the situation of expatriates in Los Angeles is rather unique. Not that this has amounted to respect, necessarily, for most Tehrangeles musicians, because everyone can agree, and many of you have already told me over the course of the past couple of days, that this is bad music. Bad. It's bad for lots of people. It's bad for cultural elites, it's bad for snobs, it's bad for classical musicians, and it's also bad according to the post-revolutionary Iranian government. In official Islamic Republic discourse, expatriate Tehrangeles cultural producers who left around the time of the revolution are sometimes called farari, escapees, people who didn't serve their time. They are Ghurbat Neshin, sitting in exile, separate from contemporary Iran and irrelevant to it. Or sometimes they are agents in the soft war who help spread corruption via expatriate media, like Tehrangeles dance instructor and, just absolute phenomenon Mohammad Khordadian, who was arrested and charged with these crimes when he visited Iran in 2002. This kind of narration of people in exile continues, musicians in exile continues. In March of just last year, 2017, the Iranian Revolutionary Court number 28 sentenced Gugush in absentia to 16 years in prison for propaganda against the Islamic Republic and for creating marakez fesad, so centers of corruption and corrupting the public more generally. These punishments are on the basis of, if we can bracket for a moment the idea that I know is common that these kinds of religious reasonings are used cynically. We can put that to the side for a second. They are, you can see these as based on the supposed influence of music, musicians, and media to affect moral disorder and political unrest among audiences, and are in a way an assertion of musicians and Western powers and media's almost metaphysical power. Western governments are also ideologically and financially committed to this idea. We wouldn't have music programming on VOA, BBC Persian, Radio Farda, or other Western state-sponsored media outlets without this similar idea, nor would Radio Farda have sponsored Gugush's concerts in Dubai, as they did in 2003, excuse me. This apparent power and relevance competes with an equally and increasingly prevalent sentiment that Los Angeles popular musicians are irrelevant, embarrassing, and a joke. So there is a song by Zed Bazi called Ironiye LA, where they talk about musicians in Los Angeles as making موسیقی غربتی روی بیت‌های سنتی, and that their موسیقی بومیده بدتر از کوبیده دولتی. So their music is just, it's terrible music that's being made by exiles on traditional beats, meaning the repetitive 6/8 beat that's very common to Mochrebi repertoire. And their music actually smells worse than government-issued kubide kebab, a notoriously smelly ground meat and onion dish. Rapper Shaheen Najafi goes further in calling Tehrangeles musicians Mochrebone Vatan Furush, or Mochreb pimping homeland pimping Mochreb. And this kind of dispersion also is cast on scholars studying this music, as I'm sure Professor Shea can relate to. I just relate a quick story that I was at a party once, actually with Aida Meftahi in Toronto in 2006, and everyone was dancing and having a good time. She introduced me to a famous journalist whose name I will not mention, and she said, this is Farzaneh, pretty soon she's going to Los Angeles to study the music there. And he looked at me dead serious and said, "Pas میخوای shit شناسی بخونی?" خب من shit شناسم. I'm a shit شناس. I'm a shitologist in this case, right? So I'm somebody who studies this. So anytime this kind of intense negative reaction occurs around something, we know that something interesting is going on. Tehrangeles music and media producers are conscious of these circulating negative dismissive assessments from these various parties, and they also recognize themselves as aging and less relevant to Iranian audiences than in prior decades. But they are protective of their position in Iranian history after the revolution because they saved popular music. Now, as and this is the discourse that is often that they often promulgate. The revolution gave them a purpose. Without it, they would just be aging pop singers. But in this case, they have attached themselves to a kind of cultural mission. So I consider the Tehrangeles music industry as one of the revolution's unintended consequences. In my past work, I've conceptualized Tehrangeles cultural formations as alternatives to culture and identity in the Islamic Republic of Iran that are forwarded through a sort of alternative public sphere. Now, this has been a synergistic relationship, selling what's not available in US and what's not available in Iran as a business strategy, but also a political kind of orientation. So I want to talk about one aspect of that idea here and think about Tehrangeles as a response to Islamism. And by Islamism, I mean the idea that in Islam, the idea that really came to prominence in the 1970s, but of course dates back much longer, that Islam holds the answers to a variety of modern contemporary questions that inspires the Muslim Brotherhood and all other types of political movements informed by Islam. So the Islamic Republic is arguably the most spectacular and successful instantiation of Islamism, generating, as we all know, constitutions, systems of government, etc., but also culture. So whether we consider ourselves to live in an Islamist moment or a post-Islamist moment, as Asif Bayat would have us believe, there is an increasing attention within the scholarly community and among anthropologists of the Middle East and Islam on the prevalence of pious cultures, pious Muslim cultures, things like halal pop, the phenomenon of the hijabista, etc. Right? So, in reaction to some of that, and also actually Hamidreza's talk is also an example of that examination, of just relatively rare in Iran to examine the efflorescence of religious cultural formations that are popular in nature. So my question is related but a little bit different. So what about the culture that comes after? If secularism can be said to produce Islamism, what does Islamism produce, right? If we follow the line of argumentation that's presented here. And one of my thoughts is that we can look to other places as well as Iran to see what an emergent trend among other populations and Iranians in which Islamists have decentered the previously dominant secular political and cultural order. So in addition to Iran, we can look to post-revolution Egypt and Erdogan's Turkey. But before I go into thinking about this, I thought I would just start with a musical example.
جاهایی هم مخالفن. برای اینکه این چادر سیاه مثل یک ابر سیاه روی صورت مثل ماهشو پوشونده. بهش میگم بذار صورت قشنگی تو ببینم. اون با ترس و وحشت همه چشماشو پشت چادرش قایم میکنه و ناوشکی میگه باشه فردا. بهش میگم آخه تا کی فردا؟ الان چند ساعت شده دیگه. بازم فردا.
Okay, so this is a song from the 1990 album Shagird Aval, Top Student, by your favorite and mine, the Southern California-based expatriate pop singer and songwriter, Mr. Shahram Shabpare. The song is called Dokhtar Chadori, or Veiled Girl. Shabpare presents us with a similar scenario to that presented in Paria or other famous Shabpare songs, a more or less innocent flirtation with a pretty neighborhood girl, rendered in a sort of folksy dialect. But the somber, dramatic musical introduction, heavy with strings, timpani, oboe, gives us an oral clue to the seriousness of this topic. He speaks to the neighborhood girl who wears a chador, the most pious of veils, favored by an Iranian woman. He longs to see this girl without her veil. He knows she's beautiful even by the bit of her that he can see. He asks to see her and she refuses, not in a flirtatious way, but with terrible fear and sadness, again emphasizing the stakes of this encounter. The girl eventually verbally acquiesces but puts him off. In some distant future, she may let him have a glimpse of her, quote, moon-like beauty, but that future has yet to come. Shabpare is frustrated. How long until he can appreciate this woman's beauty as he so desires? And then the damboli beat, the synthesizers, the chanting vocals as the song transforms into standard Shabpare fare for moving Iranian bodies on the dance floor as they shake and shimmy to him singing about wanting a girl to take off her hijab. This song is, I think, for most of us, probably, you can tell me later, transparently interpretable as an objection to compulsory veiling. When Shabpare says he doesn't mind veiling, but at the same time he does, I hear him struggling with tolerating the practice in abstract when confronted with a woman who, in his portrayal, is very unhappy wearing the veil. Now, it could be that this conservatively veiled woman is sad and frightened because a man to whom she is not related is trying to get her to take off her head covering in the middle of the street. But I suspect that we are not supposed to generalize this we are supposed to generalize this individual's unhappiness at veiling to many, if not all, women. The presence of the dark cloud covering the moon's beauty cliché is also present in early 20th century unveiling polemics and is reinvigorated in Shabpare, Ebi, and other Los Angeles pop singers' songs criticizing the veil. So Shabpare is not the only one to have an anti-veiling pop song or critical veiling pop song. In such discourse, the veil is not expressive of religious commitment or a means of liberating women from the male gaze, but a patriarchal and, after the revolution, state imposition from which women and their physical beauty should be liberated, either by themselves or with male assistance. So we can tell right away, or I'm going to argue that we can tell, that Shabpare is arguing with a pietistic relationship to Islam. The dance music itself and the fact that he makes his profession from this is another indication of his orientation towards moralistic Muslim piety. Not only is he singing about wanting a girl to unveil, he is doing so to music that accompanies the sexual tension-riddled interactions of unrelated dancing males and females who could be drinking alcohol, consuming drugs, and eventually fornicating. None of this analysis is intended to cast dispersions or make any assumptions about Shabpare's faith, his relationship to Islam, or his personal piety. Nor am I saying that Shabpare or others creating similar works are aiming to corrupt, educate, or liberate their audiences through music, though some have accused them and or lauded them for these activities. My aim in this analysis is instead to listen to Tehrangeles through the moral filter, to consider the Tehrangeles popular music industry overall as sustained transgressions of conservative forms of moral personal comportment as conceived in normative Iranian post-revolutionary Shiism. I'm teasing out the idea that Dokhtar Chadori and Tehrangeles more generally can be places for expressing culture after Islamism, cultural formations and products that emerge from, respond to, and present aesthetic and thematic alternatives to Islamism. I think, just to give you a different example, I was going to talk a lot, but I think I'm going to give you another example here. Now, this is a rather rare example of direct address to religious people. If you didn't get it in Persian, you'll get it in English. It's none of your GD business, right? I don't have a translation slide for this, but basically he's saying, Zahida, if you pious, zealous ones, people obsessed with rule following in Islam, if it's none of your business, if I want to be drunk, if I want to chase girls, if I want to do any of that, it's none of your business. If you're on the road to heaven and I'm on the road to hell, it's none of your business. So this is actually a secularist orientation towards religion, right? He's not saying down with the Prophet Muhammad. He's not saying any of those things. He's saying circumscribe your religion to the point where you do not impose on the public, on my private or public activities. And in that kind of, this is, at the same time, this is a rather nostalgic piece to me because of the musical references, because of the style of speech. And harkens, it's not hard for me to imagine, perhaps some of you had similar visions passing through your mind, a scene in one of the film Farsi cabaret scenes of Jahil sitting and saying, this kind of action, saying this is, so in a sense, this kind of, or we can think about Hafez's poems also addressing Zahid, right? So we don't have to say that this is a strictly post-revolutionary type of complaint about religious intervention in personal life. But given the musical references to a very particular pre-revolutionary kafei kind of sound, and given the timing in which this was released, this is 2005, this particular, and the fact that it's released in Los Angeles, outside of Iran, all help me think of it as part of a larger phenomenon in which cultural production is directed into avenues that are opposing, if not set on destruction, but set on at least opposing and presenting alternatives to a specifically Islamic form of an interventionist Islamist identity. So if there is if there is an Islamist culture, then there is also an anti or an or counter-Islamist culture, which may yet be emergent, but will appear wherever the Islamist culture is or was. So sociologist Reza Gholami has studied Iranians in the UK and argues for what he calls a pervasive non-Islamiosity. It doesn't roll off the tongue, but what he means is a specifically and powerfully anti-Islamic intra-diasporic secularism. I like Gholami's work on this, but he stops short of thinking about cultural production because he doesn't really address popular music, and we know the reasons why popular music has been particularly rich as a source of why it was banned so quickly after the revolution, why television wasn't, for instance, in the same ways, or why film could be repurposed in a way that music wasn't. We just don't have 300 years of fiqh telling us that we can't watch TV, right? So we have this. There's this entrenched kind of moral, I'm imagining it as fluff around music that we have to deal with. That makes it different from other types of expressive culture, though dance I would also put there as well. I think before we go too far into ideology, I want to transition into a conversation I had with a satellite television producer who I'll call Ali in Los Angeles in 2007, where it became very clear that the business model for satellite television and Tehrangelis in relation to Iran was to provide Iranian audiences with programming and advertising that connected them with what they could not get easily in the country. So this channel, the man explained, survived solely on advertising revenue from both Iranian and non-Iranian companies selling products either within Iran itself or in Dubai, where Iranians who could afford to travel might purchase foreign or luxury goods or real estate. The channel also showed advertisements for products that couldn't easily be marketed in Iran. Ali's example was hair dye, which is problematic because showing a woman's uncovered face and body would break local laws in Iran. So you have all probably seen hair dye being sold with a woman's face marked out. At least that's what it was like a while ago. So this advertising revenue, which he said amounted to about $200,000 a month at best, came as a direct result of the fact that his clients were happy with how successful their products were within Iran. So what I asked was attracting Iran-based viewers to satellite television in the first place. Ali's answer was simple. It was popular music. He estimated that music videos made up 60% of the channel's programming, while it represented nearly all the content on other expatriate stations like PMC or PEN, Persian Entertainment Network. Like the advertisements for hair dye, the success of expatriate satellite television within Iran rested on its ability to provide the audience with what they could not acquire locally, or maybe more accurately, what people in Los Angeles imagined that they could not attain locally. He explained his channel's appeal via a point-by-point comparison with what Iranian state television could offer to its Iran-based viewers. Quote, "At the end of the day, music is the key because the Iranian government cannot compete with those of us in LA. They have a big budget for serials. They have all the access to sports. We steal the feed from them most of the time for the sports and replay it on our channel. But they have better access to sports and more money. For movies, okay, all the movies made in Persian are in Iran. The only thing we've got is music." A few minutes later in our conversation, he offered clarification. "We are not better than them in music because they cannot have, in anything except music, because they cannot have Andy with 10 half-naked girls singing and dancing." Hold on here. I want to go to that because there we go. Yeah. While half-naked girls singing and dancing are common in modern media culture the world over, Ali's comments indicate that Tehrangelis pop's economic value is enhanced by official Iranian policies, especially compulsive veiling and limits on social dance and women's public singing, which are intended to maintain public spaces and public cultures, adhering to the state's definition of Islamic morality. It has always been possible to profit from immoral or impious products and experiences, but Iran's Islamist transformation turned what might have been previously conceived as moral transgression musicians into something much more serious. When Ali's family arrived in Southern California in the 1980s, popular music, with or without half-naked girls, was itself one of the expatriate industry's immoral offerings. But the intervening decades of Iranian governmental agencies and regulatory bodies permitting popular music has changed that relationship. As Ali corrected himself above, even in 2007, it was no longer true that Tehrangeles had pop music when Iran didn't. As the parameters of official morality have adjusted over time, the economic openings for Tehrangeles cultural producers have also shifted. So one of the things that remains durable is their ability to work with half-naked women, right? So this is one of the main things that we still have. Another thing that Nahid Jan, how am I doing on time?
I would say, can you manage to finish within sort of 5 minutes?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So another aspect of what is being preserved in Los Angeles, and this is also common in current Turkey, is sort of nostalgia for the modern era. So the idea that the Islamist movement, right, this is a bit of a fallacy to think of Islamist movements as being hostile to modernity, but in a vision in which secularists have imagined that the modern world should be secular, then the appearance of religion can make it seem as if time has gone backwards somehow. In Turkey, there's a great a book that's called Nostalgia for the Modern that I've used to talk about Gugush with. So I'll let you follow up on that yourself, but I'll say that Los Angeles is in some ways a museum and a graveyard, literally, for the pre-revolutionary past, where we have all kinds of people buried in Los Angeles, right in downtown. So probably most of you know who that is. And of course, we have Hayede and Mahasti, who are also buried there, along with Vigil. And recordings themselves are a kind of dead object that can be reinvigorating at times. So I want to, in order to close, I want to think about women in particular, because I think this is, as we've noted several times over the course of the conference, the woman question, that one, about 50% of the population, is the sticking point, right? This is still where our red line is. So thinking, again, comparatively, and thinking about Egypt, so this is a comment, a quote that I'll read to you about the current situation for media in Egypt, and about the economic value of uncovered women and the way that having an Islamist cultural sphere actually enhances the economic value of nudity, essentially. So from the perspective of economy, says Michael Frischkopf, an ethnomusicologist of Egypt, contrasting rules for female representations enable highly profitable musical practices to thrive in separate domains, despite Islamic discourses deeply critical of music. The media system depends on the maintenance of multiple media worlds, and we could internally consonant, apparently mutually antagonistic and yet symbiotic. While religion and capitalism may appear contradictory, the pursuit of profit versus higher principles, their media worlds are mutually reinforcing. So I want to think about Los Angeles being reinforced by the Islamic Republic. God forbid that the government should ever change. Their entire purpose could really dissipate before their eyes. But this idea of synergy, I don't want to be too cynical about this, because I think this idea of synergy is really important. So extreme veiling enhances the economic value of the female body, while the unveiled body viscerally legitimizes the social, spiritual value of moral virtue. The apparent visible contradiction between these worlds thus conceals an unacknowledged synergy by which each world maintains its boundaries. And so I think about that a lot in terms of Los Angeles, a lot in terms of Los Angeles singers, and a lot in terms, in particular, of Seppia. Seppia is one of our few Los Angeles singers who has really made her body the center of her performance. So I want to read, and I should say that when I'm talking about this sort of post-Islamist space, I'm not always talking about things that are as direct as what the two examples that I showed you before. I have never heard anybody refer to Seppia as a khanande siyasi, a political singer. She has at times deployed a language of feminist emancipation through sexuality that has specific resonances given the transnational post-revolutionary cultural context in which her technologically mediated voice and image are produced. So in a Facebook post from 2014, Seppia described herself as a strong, sexy, proud, yet independent Persian woman, unbound by any taboo, and breaking away from the previously perceived female image in Iran that has always been the victim throughout Iran's post-Islamic history. She continues, I am a part of all the proud and strong Persian women who show the world that we are not less than any man and can do all they do and more. Her self-designation as Persian rather than Iranian, I think most of us understand where that comes from. The recourse to mythical pre-revolution or pre-Islamic history in which women and men were imagined to be more equal, but really her taboo-breaking behavior, which I think here refers to her revealing clothing and erotic performances as emancipatory, once again puts the female body right in the center of these kinds of struggles. So if we look again to Egypt, and I'm just going to warn you, there's going to be a naked woman on the screen. Okay, so everybody just get ready. Okay, here we go. You ready? Ready? Okay. All right. Okay. So, Alia Magda El Mahdi is an Egyptian activist who took a picture of herself in her bedroom, the one with her wearing the stockings, and it went on Facebook and Twitter, and it was in the aftermath of the 2011 revolution in Egypt, and this became a problem for her, right? I mean, obviously, but the body itself becomes the site of expressing these kinds of opposition. And for her, Sharia is not a constitution, and she's surrounded by other women in the second picture, which is I believe that picture was taken in Germany, but it may have been Sweden where she was living. The body becomes very central to this kind of expression, and we don't see that. We were talking about societal constraints versus political constraints and so on. In Los Angeles, land of the free, home of the brave, we could have many more half-naked Iranian women singing and dancing on television than we do. We don't, though, because on some level that's also a conservative, because there's a price to pay for that, and the price can be very high. That kind of activism has been, another naked woman coming, has been more the avenue of cultural elites and people who can actually do this and transcend and not be marked by it, right? Not be marked by it in the sense of their immediate professional networks. Of course, Golshifteh Farahani has also paid for her own activism in this sense, but the body becomes a site of this kind of activism because the female form is open to these interpretations in the reaction to Islamism. So you're going to get a very strange slide next because I thought this talk was going to be different. That's not what you should see. I am going to wrap it up. I'm going to wrap it up here and just say in closing that my sort of exercise in looking outside of Iran immediately, both looking to diaspora and looking to comparative examples, is part of what really interests me in doing the work. And as much as I truly do appreciate the in-depth research that's being done on Iran and the research that we've been able to share with each other in this very unique situation, I also think that there's something to be gained from looking beyond the Iranian situation and beyond what is easy to think of as a very exceptional situation. In fact, I think our case has much to offer as many of the world's populations grapple with different types of regime changes and political movements informed by Islam. And after all, we are the vanguard in that area. So thank you.
Thank you very much for a wonderful talk. Is there any way to ask questions to the previous speaker?
Yes. I'm going to connect Hamidreza.
Okay, while we're being connected, are there any questions for the second speaker? Yes.
Thank you for this talk, and I greatly appreciate the focus that you're bringing to, I guess, the terms behind this in the way it's stigma and used, I guess, in dismissive ways. But at the same time, and I appreciate how you're trying to create this connection between discourse or a conversation that happens between Los Angeles and the homeland. But it also seems that it is inevitable that in the traumatic experience of diaspora, you grow apart from the homeland and the homeland grows apart from you. So this space does begin to grow, where people are speaking past each other. I guess that's just a comment. And another question I had is, I also, when I was studying in Los Angeles, I did also see a lot of these discussions happening around Los Angeles' critique of the way things are happening in Iran, and this secular nationalism that still pervades in Los Angeles. And knowing the discussions that usually surround these things and happen in the kind of more private spheres, I think it's impossible right now to talk about secular Iranian nationalism without talking about anti-Arab racism. And that's also something that's also encroaching in Iran, but in a different way, was propagated by the regime and also influenced by Los Angeles, that can have potentially very dangerous repercussions. So maybe talking about that. And another thing that also been thinking about is a lot of the times in these kind of Los Angeles productions, I understand how Seppia is kind of functioning in this kind of Western feminist discourse, but at the same time, a lot of the other productions in Los Angeles don't seem to be functioning on feminist values, but rather exploitation of women, most of the time not Iranian women, and roles of black and brown and ethnically diverse women. So maybe talking towards that as well.
Yeah. I'm going to think about your second question first because I already forgot the first one, so you can remind me of what that is. Yeah. Oops. Uh-huh. Okay. I'm thinking about the protection of the virtue of Iranian women by substituting brown and white other women, right? And how that's something that Professor Shea has talked about in terms of dance performances. And when you know, it's this funny thing where you watch the backup dancers in a lot of these videos, you can tell immediately that they aren't Iranian by the way that they move, if you can't tell by the way that they look. One of the more interesting things, one of the people who I had the most interesting conversations with about the dynamics of being a woman in the music industry was with Shahrzad Sepanlu, who has tried very hard to carve out a space for herself that was neither video vixen, is basically Dokhtar Khub, is trying to be a good girl, especially in the early part of her career. Now it's a little bit different. And she maybe is an exception a little bit to what you're saying, but I think because you're talking about the question that you had was about women who are embracing exploitation, or for instance using exploitation. I think it would be very easy to make that argument about Seppia as well. One Facebook post does not an activist make, right? You know. On the other hand, I think that what I'm trying to do is be a little bit more circumspect about how we think about nudity, and sexuality, and whether or not, and maybe whether things can be both and all at the same time. This is sort of a third wave feminism, or third wave feminism type of idea that we can both be proud of our sexuality and be activists and choose to exploit ourselves or choose to profit from our own bodies. And those kinds of decisions are very hard for Iranian women to make, and they're hard for all kinds of women to make, but they're hard even in diaspora. I mean, I don't want to make any assumptions about where it's easier or harder to do these kinds of things. But I think I'll think about that more. Tell me, anti-Arab racism. Yeah.
In relation to secular nationalism.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I thought about doing a lot of my videos of pictures of people with pre-Islamic imagery on their baseball hats and their motorcycles and stuff like that. This sort of mythology of the pure Aryan past and so on. Yeah, it's a real problem. I think that it's. At the same time, the conversation in Los Angeles around Iranian identity, and particularly around Islam, is also complicated by the fact that there's a very large percentage of religious minorities. So that Islam really, if we think about, I'm gonna bracket the Arab issue for a second, but in a sense, there's a more diverse, there's a very diverse creation of Iranian identity that has to accept Baha'is, has to have Jewish Iranians, Zoroastrians, Christians, Armenians, etc. Everybody all together. So there is a way in which there's this revival / continuity of Shah era nationalism that is quite racist that people promulgate. At the same time, there is this other side of it that is more complicated, or maybe they're the same side. Anyway, thanks for the question. Yeah.
I wonder if there's any continuity between